Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. This is our fourth session of this semester's Civic Leadership Academy, hosted by the American Democracy Project in collaboration with the Office of Community Engagement here at IU South Bend. And this is the beginning of part 2, where we will look at federal and state policymaking. And then we will turn to understanding local policymaking at the county and municipal level, and also we'll have a brief discussion of township government and what they do. And then we'll talk about what happens if you feel like your issue isn't getting enough attention and you're not having the effect that you would like to have, or that perhaps you want to engage in a protest to get more visibility towards your issue. Always remembering that there should be some policy asks and some long-term strategy as well, but that can be a good way to get public and media attention. We'll talk about ways to do that. And then finally, how to engage in grassroots problem solving. Ultimately, that will influence decision makers, right? But those decision makers could be at any level of government, and sometimes it may even be a partnership or with a private organization that you are trying to influence, a business, for example, or a nonprofit organization that will help a community. And so there are all kinds of issues that we might identify as problems or opportunities. And how would we build coalitions? How will we get people to join with us? How will we get public attention to our issue? How will we get media attention if that's useful, right? And how can we then use what we learned about identifying decision makers in the last session to really shape that issue and find a solution working with our neighbors and across groups that we need in order to make that change, whether it is a stop sign in our own neighborhood or street lights, figuring out what's available, what resources you need, and how to get them. So we'll be talking about all the way from what happens in Congress and the state legislature to what happens in local policy making bodies, and then finally what can happen at the grassroots. So we're delighted that you are here today. Today we are going to talk about the U.S. Congress and the Indiana General Assembly, how a bill becomes a law in each of those, and what are the places along the way that citizens can make their voices heard, and how we can try to maximize our influence. Right? We know that we're not always going to get everything that we want, right? But where are the places where we can actually try to make a difference, and in some cases, make a difference in what's proposed and what passes. So I want to thank the women of IU South Bend that is supporting this initiative, and also the American Democracy Club, which provided your mints and treats for today. So again, if you are hungry, nachos in the back, mints on your table, water over there. We're going to start with Dr. Jamie Smith. Dr. Smith is a professor in our Department of Political Science. He teaches our courses in urban politics, but also teaches a course in the U.S. Congress. He teaches a course in presidency. He teaches our American government course, as well as some courses in media and politics. And he has won numerous teaching awards. His research is in urban politics. But today he really is going to focus on the legislative process. We all learned it, hopefully, at some point in junior high or high school, right? But he'll really give us a bit more complex view this evening, while helping us to understand the process better and how we can influence what happens. Dr. Smith.
Thank you for being here, everyone. Good to see you. I am going to do a couple things. So I'm going to assume, at least for part of this presentation, that we've all just landed on Earth and in this place, and we don't know too much about how lawmaking works. So I'll go over some of the basics. But I also want to introduce you to a few of the ideas that political scientists have found valuable in explaining exactly what happens when the lawmaking process is occurring. Not so much how we learn it, but also how it progresses when it is underway. And then I'm also going to spend a little bit of time today just walking you through some of the resources that are available for tracking legislation. So a big part of affecting legislation or attempting to is knowing what's out there and what's being discussed. One thing I always tell my students, I think, that is a little bit maybe surprising about Congress, the U.S. Congress, whether we're talking about the House or the Senate, is that at least we've gone dark. This is part of my strategy for the presentation. I don't know exactly what to do. It's okay, it's all right. But I will say, this fits perfectly. So what I was about to say is that, surprisingly, the U.S. Congress is quite a transparent institution in terms of its official proceedings. If there is something you want to know about when it is happening, who said what in the halls of Congress, and who is proposing which legislation, who's voting for it, who's sponsoring it, these are things you can find out, assuming your screen is not dark. All right, it came back. So we'll see. So I'll just go through a few of those sites and give you some advice on keeping track of these things. Again, a pretty transparent institution in terms of some of those resources out there. And then, as Dr. Benyon mentioned, I think with the U.S. Congress, it's quite a different game when you're talking about access points, especially if you're living in the Midwest of this country. It's a little bit more difficult to access some of the things that are happening, but I'll talk both practically and theoretically about how it can be done. Just to kind of preface that discussion, I will say, as opposed to maybe affecting local change or even to some extent at the state level, U.S. national legislative politics, it's usually about group mobilization. It's not one person. It's going to be through the groups that you join and the coalitions that they build to try to affect legislation. So there are a lot of very heavily resourced organizations coming from all ideological viewpoints on many issues, and they are the ones really kind of hashing out how to impact that legislation. So these are our three main topics. I think I dedicate 3 or 4 class sessions to this in a semester, but we've got 22 minutes left. We can do it. So first of all, I want to introduce you to a concept called unorthodox lawmaking. So this is the major concept that political scientists use when they think about how the legislative process has changed. The legislative process that you learned in 5th grade, 8th grade, senior year in high school, sophomore year of college, they tend to refer to that as the textbook version, which is a good way of learning essentially the process in a simple way, right? So we're thinking essentially about an orderly process. We know how a bill goes through the different houses and then goes to the president. This is a very kind of predictable and easy to understand process, and generally is presented as kind of going by the book. But of course, if you start to dig into what happens in Washington in the House and Senate, it never quite works that simply. And so the political scientist Barbara Sinclair essentially developed this idea she called unorthodox lawmaking, which, you know, I think at this point it may just be orthodox lawmaking. I don't know. At the time, it was essentially this you know, setting it apart from the textbook version. What does that unorthodox process look like? It's much more unwieldy. You know, it's not the nice progression of a bill is introduced in the House, voted on, you know, goes to a committee, etc. I think one of the key findings of our current moment is that, unlike the maybe more grassroots individual member version of Congress, at least on large issues, the unorthodox version is very party leadership driven. So that is to say that the people at the top of both parties, they are the ones that are really influencing how that process goes forward. The other thing, and probably if you follow this in the news, and I'm assuming probably that if you showed up tonight, you are someone who's already doing some of that. And I try to communicate this to my students, that there are multiple ways to get a bill through the process to get it all the way to a president's desk. And some of those, at times, it looks like it's not going to happen, but there are many tricks and ways to essentially manipulate or strategically use congressional rules to move through that process. And there are also strategic rules and actions that people use to block this process. So just to give you a couple of examples of what an unorthodox version might look like, or what it contains. On the one hand, in the textbook version, you essentially see a bill introduced, and it goes to a committee, and that committee considers it. Well, what Barbara Sinclair found, and you'll find if you dig into some of the data on this, is that oftentimes a bill doesn't go to one committee. Due to the jurisdiction of committees, it will go to multiple committees. We call this multiple referral. So you have 3 different committees working on a bill, they come up with 3 different versions of it, and then the party leadership essentially has to sort through that. So kind of keep this in mind as we move forward, just to say there's that textbook version that we know, and then there is that kind of unpredictable, real-world experience of how a bill does eventually become a law. So next, the process of lawmaking. And at the expense of being a little bit confusing, I wanted to sort of discuss this in broad stages. And in doing that, I'm suggesting that these broad stages apply to both the textbook and unorthodox versions of lawmaking. The unorthodox version, they may happen in some sort of roundabout ways, but just so we know, I mean, essentially all bills must be drafted at some point. That's a process that is either done by a member of Congress, a lawyer in a member of Congress's office, or an interest group, right? So I think one of the tropes that exists is, oh, you didn't read the bill. We hear this a lot as a critique of members of Congress. I'll tell you why they don't read the bills. It's because it's not fun reading. It's written by lawyers, it's legalese, it's code, it's hard to work through. So that bill drafting takes process and consultation with legal experts, with people who know the policy in and out. Really, a bill in the US Congress, it's mostly just reference to existing US code. It's making small changes to it. It's going to perform certain parts of it. The next thing that happens is bill introduction. And a bill that's introduced in the House or Senate has a sponsor or multiple sponsors. So this is something that essentially when you write a bill, you might seek out sponsors to say, I want your name on this so that people know going in, there's already support for this, right? Those multiple sponsors are on a bill. And the first thing that happens to a bill, and maybe the last thing that happens to a bill, is that it is introduced to a committee. The committee, I've labeled that committee inaction or committee action, because most bills never make it out of committee. If you look at some statistics on this, I'll spare going through the internet, but in the current Congress, the 119th, about 1% of proposed bills have been passed. The average for bills proposed in our modern sort of contemporary Congress is around 13 to 15,000 bills per session, so that's every 2 years. That's a lot of bills. Usually around 300 or make it through. So a very, very small percentage even see the light of day. They go to a committee, they never make it out. But committees have these actions that they will take on a bill. Some of the most important things they do, they have hearings on the topic on the bill. They will amend a bill, which is referred to as markup. So they go through that process of essentially marking up or amending the bill. They vote on these amendments. They vote on their new version of the bill, and then they report it back to the full House or Senate, right? And so you have this committee stage. But I really want to stress again, most bills are not going to make it out of that committee stage. The next series of actions we might call floor action or floor procedure. So if a bill is referred and scheduled on one of the calendars of the Senate or the House, you will see some of those different things, floor debate, amendments, and votes, right? So those are the major things that happen once a bill gets to the floor. One of the key things, of course, you probably already know about legislation is that to pass a bill and send it to the president, it needs to be the same version in the House and the Senate. They must be identical. No? It's not easy to do, right?
Not easy to do, but once you start having multiple bills, then the committee gets sent up to resolve
Yeah,
the differences.
So what happens then is almost always you do get different versions, unless it's really non-controversial, and that's where a conference will occur between the two houses. They will each send representatives. Conferences are actually they're not the norm. They do exist on large pieces of legislation, but also you kind of have this what's sometimes called a ping pong effect. They just kind of go back and forth informally to resolve those differences. We learn about the conference committee, but usually it can be resolved before that point. But then, of course, you have the final votes on a bill, and at that point you have it sent for consideration by the president, who can sign or veto, or who can do nothing and let it sit to see if Congress will adjourn, which it doesn't really do anymore. So the pocket veto is somewhat moot at this point. So again, big differences in textbook versus unorthodox is that you have a lot of different ways to manage that floor action. Sometimes you have party leaders that will bypass committee action. There are a lot of different ways to get a bill through. It can be done at speed. In writing up notes and kind of thinking about this presentation, I think one thing that came to my mind is that the legislative process is long. It can be very long until it's not, and and then it usually works really quickly at the end, sometimes in ways you can't really keep track of. So we have about 17 minutes. If we can pause, I'd maybe just take a couple questions. If there's something you think I glossed over, you have a question on any specific procedure, I'm happy to just talk about that briefly, and then I want to show you some resources you can use. Yes, sir.
So, a question about, reading it and knowing what's in it.
Yes.
Because they can't have the time, it's not really the interest, but is there somebody who summarizes it for them?
Yes.
Or, okay.
Yeah, so congressional staff, you have legislative aides or legal aides, they will be primarily the ones that are saying, these are, they'll give you the summary, they'll be reading it, they'll be watching it closely. It does happen. These are, Congress, we talk about Congress as one branch and kind of the bureaucracy as another branch, but Congress is a bureaucracy. It is a huge bureaucracy with a lot of different staff levels. Each office has huge staff, each committee has a staff, so yes, it is being read, it's being considered.
Just not by the member of Congress.
Not always. And you can also see party leadership lead on that too, to say these are the, here are the highlights. So that's a great question. Yes, John, student of mine, yes.
First of all, I guess I want that. The highlights don't allow for the guts, the mechanics to show through.
Sure.
But more to the point, as a doctor of political science, do you find this to be an efficient method?
I'm sorry, could you speak up, please?
He asked if this is an efficient method of making policy.
Thank you.
So and I will say that's a long-term kind of debate in political science, because many legislative scholars would say that Congress shouldn't be efficient, that it's there for deliberation, that if someone wants to critique or bring up these small points, the very detailed parts of the legislation that you asked about, that's what it's there for. That there's a debate to say, well, if you want efficient, if you want speed, go the executive route. It's kind of like the expertise versus democracy debate. So I don't think it's efficient, but I think it does give multiple access points, and it gives multiple options to kind of get involved and make points about the legislation.
And to clarify, the process seems to be lawyers who went to law school drawing the drafts for aides who have less experience than lawyers to read the drafts, to explain them to politicians who could be anybody.
I think that, I don't mean to take the agency away from members of Congress. They have policy ideas, they have strong beliefs, they are trying to get things done. They would be the driving force behind this. And I would point out that being a lawyer is one of the leading professions for members of Congress, so it's not like they are just saying, oh, I know. So many of them may draft good portions of the bill, but they do have legal staff to say, okay, go make sure this gels or with current code, or what are we changing in the US code, right? So no, I'm not trying to say that members of Congress do not touch these things, but it's oftentimes a multiple person effort. Okay, two more clarifying, I'm always tempted here, we're gonna run out of time. Yes, sir, and then in the back, yeah.
Yeah, we often hear about so-and-so won't bring certain numbers of bills to the floor.
Right.
What gives them the power to decide whether a bill gets a floor vote or not?
They are agenda setters. Within committees, that is one power of a committee chair. They have the power to they set the agenda of the committee. And in that sense, again, back to efficiency or hearing all ideas, that's just part of the role of the legislature. So it's the power of the committee chair, or also in the House, the Speaker of the House has the scheduling power to decide what makes it to the floor on certain calendars and when it will be discussed, and also controls the Rules Committee through a point. So yeah, I mean, it's all about having the power to set the rules of the game, and if you know the rules of the game, you can make the institution work really how you like it. So, and I don't necessarily mean that as a critique, but that's kind of how it goes. Yeah, great question. Yeah.
And the speaker and those committee chairs would be members of the majority
Right.
party, so that's how it
Exactly.
would connect in some ways to our votes.
Exactly. Oh yes, yeah. And then one more clarifying, and I want to make sure I get some.
Thank you. First of all, this is the best breakout of the process I've ever seen, and I've been in this for quite a while. So thank you. Second of all, having worked in the U.S. Senate for 8 years. Bridging the Jerry Ford to Ronald Reagan period, so I saw quite a bit. It's dynamic. It is dynamic, and we, the people, really influence, but it doesn't happen overnight. And number two, what is happening right now is never happened before. So one cannot take what is happening right now as an example of how the process works. The continuum is from pure power, which the White House is exercising right now, to full dynamic of citizen pressure on your elected congressperson. And it's what you or we accept as acceptable. So I just want to say, terrific framework for the process, but that does not let us off the hook for getting involved. One quick thing, the example, I've got two examples real fast. One is line 21, closed captioning. That came up from grassroots from the School for the Deafs all over the country. Bob Dole was Senate leader at that point. ABC, CBS, and NBC were absolutely opposed to it because they might need line 21 20 years from now. This is right, it finally got passed like 81 or 82. Somebody finally got to Bob Dole. When he realized the benefit to hard of hearing, he flipped overnight because he had a granddaughter who was hard of hearing. Number two is, and then boom, we have line number two, and that was pure grassroots. The second one is long COVID. Bernie Sanders is chairman of the Health, Labor, and whatever the other part of the committee is. Long COVID has major implications for predicting the labor force coming forward. Senator Sanders is both health and labor concerned. He called for hearings in January of 24. He had 3 days of full hearings, and the bill making long COVID a disability got passed. It is now law, and that is an example of how quickly it can happen if you can stick with it and figuring out who you need to talk to. Yeah. And if a chairman's opposed to it, you're probably not going to get it out unless you do a lot of broad lobbying.
Right.
So anyway, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, and just think, I'll just follow up on that to say, I think in terms of some of the concepts we talk about, I think what you're describing is essentially like a legislative champion, right? Someone who you can find to make the spokesperson for your issue and bring it to those places. So that's great. Thank you so much. And again, I think we have a little bit of time at the end. So these are things, again, probably you know about, but I wanted to at least just kind of, if I go for the things I would feel most comfortable with and really get you the information. First is congress.gov, and if you haven't spent time on congress.gov, I always joke it's the least appealing website name, or the most boring website name for my students, congress.gov. But it is just a trove of data, a long-term historical data, but also up to the moment updates on what is happening in both houses of the U.S. Congress, in committees, etc. So I kind of call this the ultimate utility. From the moment of introduction all the way, you can look at all of the roll call votes here. As long as there's a roll call vote on a bill, you can find it on congress.gov. As you start to dig a little bit, you'll start to see many bills are passed on voice vote. Those are not recorded, of course, but I wanted to point that out. Another thing I would point you to are the committee websites. This has gotten a little odd and kind of hyper-partisan era that we live in, as different parties will actually have their own committee websites. But if you are looking for what committees are up to, you can go directly to their websites. They often have YouTube channels. They will put up their hearings. They will put up their reports. That's where you can really dig into those multiple layers that John referenced a minute ago. And I may not have stressed it quite enough when we were going through all those points of access, but committees are really where you need to look if you're thinking about trying to impact or access something early. Committees are the place to look or try to get ahead of things there. Of course, C-SPAN, another place where you can go see Congress happen. If you are not someone who lives a metro or drive away from the Capitol building, C-SPAN will bring it to you live, not to put C-SPAN out of business, but Congress.gov also streams right on their homepage. They've got the short, so Congress.gov does everything. But that's where you can actually go listen to the statements of members of Congress. And then once you know what you're looking for, I think if you haven't used a Google alert, that's a pretty good way to track what is happening in the media. Anytime a phrase is mentioned or a bill name is mentioned, Google will automatically send you a reference to where that is happening. And part of that, knowing what to search for, is part of the challenge. A lot of the laws that we hear discussed, or bills we hear discussed in the news, they aren't referred to by their technical name, like HR 1375. They're usually just described by the sponsor or some other way. And if you just type that in to Congress.gov, you won't necessarily find it. So once you kind of know what you're looking for, I think Google Alerts can be a pretty good way of looking around. Now, with the tech we're working with here, this is going to be a little bit clunky because I can't see what's happening behind me in front of me. That's what I told the driving instructor. But okay, anyway, so there's a mirror for that. But I don't have there's no mirror. So I'm going to bring up a website. This might get a little bit clunky, but I did just want to show you what Congress.gov looks like. So that you can get an idea, as I said, you can jump right into the sessions as they're happening. I feel like anytime I do this in class, it's let's see what's happening in the House, and every time they're not meeting, but that's okay, right? It happens over and over. But so this will tell you, of course, it'll kind of set its own agenda to say here are the things that most people are looking at right now. But Congress.gov can also essentially just, if you're interested in any topic, you can search for. So let's a little crowd searching here. Shout out a topic you think is somewhat random. Give me something a little bit off the beaten path.
Vaping.
What's that?
Vaping.
Okay, 57. So 57 pieces of legislation that use this. So you can just sort of search on any topic that way. But also for the purpose of kind of talking about process and transparency, this is always dangerous, but if you just click on a random bill, you never know what you're going to see in terms of the process. But this is a bill that actually passed. This is HR 1. That's another way Congress sets agenda. They will tell you what is the most important thing on their agenda. Look at HR 1, HR 2. I don't know what we're up to right now, but you can see the sponsor here. But the thing I want to show you is not to dig into the legislation at all, but just to say, if you're in Congress.gov, what you can do is look at all actions. So there are 140 actions on this bill. So you can see, of course, down to the last, signed into public law, down to the last roll call. And I'm seeing now this is the worst setup for this screen. It's all cut in half, and you can't really see. But for every Senate amendment and the kind of vote-a-rama that occurred over this bill, you can see every Senate amendment. But for most bills, so if we go back to our vaping search, I always, whenever I'm talking about such things, I know the chancellor's going to let's look at their search on vaping here. Let's dig in, something. But so a lot of times what you'll see, and this is kind of going back. Let's do a filter for, if we say current Congress, so we can say we want only this Congress, the 119th Congress. This will show us then instead the vaping options only on the table right now. I did a search earlier for, I forget what I did, just playing around for class. It gave me something from the 24th Congress. It was not current, but it had a funny name. It kind of sounded like a band name. Okay, but here we are. We're already to HR 3767, our current Congress. And this one, it looks like, you can see the co-sponsors, all of these things I'm talking about. This one's passed House, but this is what you're more likely to see. Let's take a look at HR 3855. Again, I don't know what it is. Prohibit smoking on the premises of any facility of the Veterans Health Administration and for other purposes, proposed by Representative Dunn of Florida's 2nd District. You can see the full text of the bill here. You can see that the actions taken so far, and this is what you'll see on most bills. Introduced, June 10. Referred to the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, June 10. That's it, right? I mean, that's most of what you're going to see when you dig into Congress.gov, unless you're looking at some of the bigger pieces of legislation that make it all the way through. So I could stumble and fumble through Congress.gov, but I wouldn't. That would just kind of be a waste of time right now. Go check it out, see what you can find. Yes, yeah.
So, quick question. A lot of bills will die in committee just because of inattention.
Yep.
Sometimes it gets brought up as an amendment. Do you have the ability to see what it's been tried to be tied to as a rider in other bills? Or?
Yes, so as long as it's, as long as that's, you can see all of the individual amendments that kind of come through the House and Senate. Now, part of unorthodox lawmaking is that the House has been very restrictive, not just this House, but the House over the past 20 years has been very restrictive of how many amendments are allowed from each side. So you get equal amendments from Democrats and Republicans, but that's been pretty restricted, so you won't necessarily see it there, but in the Senate, you still have a very much more wide open process to try to tag things on as writers, or even take an entire bill and put it in another bill, so, and you can see that process happening. You have to learn to read a little bit of code. It's not quite as bad as the Matrix, but you have to kind of know what you're looking at, right? So again, just spend some time in here. John, one more point, and I do want to get to some big ones before we close out, because I think I have 1 minute left.
So speaking of coding, like, who owns the code to this website? We live in an age.
It's a .gov, yeah.
It's a .gov.
I would guess someone, again, Congress is a bureaucracy. Maybe the IT office working with the clerks of the House and Senate, kind of giving all of the documents over to have them put in. I would guess that. But I will also just say, like, usually, like, this is just the text of the bill, and you can get it in multiple formats. So you can go read the bill if you want. It's there for you if you want to go look at it. Okay, so congress.gov, check it out. The other thing I will look at here, in terms of access points, I think that the big point I wanted to make was essentially just that early is good in politics. You want to be early. And as we know from watching Congress over the past couple of decades, it's pretty hard to access at the end, even for experts, right? It's hard to change minds. So I just say during lawmaking, in the end, at least in the US Congress, especially with our high levels of polarization, it's hard to win hearts and minds or change anything at that point. So in terms of before a bill, access, I would just say staying in contact with lawmakers, joining advocacy groups that line up with your interests and what you want to do. There is no shortage of advocacy groups. They are not all powerful or influential, but you can find one for what you're interested in, at least in some way. So look at advocacy groups, or if you want to call them interest groups, whatever you want to call them, they're out there. And then also, attending meetings, being present, making sure you are talking about your issue. Because I think that's, in kind of thinking about what is most impactful, I have a couple of observations from a political science study on successful attempts at advocacy in terms of what tends to predict policy change. I don't want to dig too much into the weeds on this, but just to say that being able to get attention for your issue is probably the largest hurdle. And that comes down to how you talk about it. That comes down to the policy environment at the time, which you probably don't have much power over, but it really is essentially just trying to get your idea and policy issue out there. I think I'm out of time, so we can do some Q&A, but I guess one other point I would just say, Elizabeth asked me to ask about, going to meetings, and the U.S. Congress is open. You get there early. You can attend most committee meetings. That's a bit of a drive from here, but you can do it. And also, if you want to attend a session of the U.S. House or Senate, again, that is something you can't. They're open to the public. I think the best thing you can do is contact your member and say, hey, I'm interested in coming, and they can help either make sure you know the process or even help you get in the door. So those are some observations from an outsider. Sounds like we have some people who've worked in the institution here tonight, so they can help us understand that more. And any questions if we have time? If not, I'm happy to just step aside.
Questions?
We talk about access, and obviously, if you know your member of Congress well, however, unfortunately, today a lot of it comes down to money and how much you've donated to their campaign. I believe that, correct me if I'm wrong, but they seem to be more open to those people who are hefty donors.
That's a tough one to start. I mean, in terms of like the empirics on it, I would say that the access points are oftentimes through places where money is given to a campaign, right? So essentially that's a time where you can get FaceTime with a member. That's not forgotten. I think that, again, political scientists are oftentimes accused of being somewhat status quo enhancers, and that we look for ways of explaining things other than the simple kind of like, it's got to be the money. So I guess one thing is that a lot of these groups that are, once the bill gets to the stages of the final stages, almost all the groups are moneyed, which is either a thing that essentially cancels that out, or it speaks to what you're saying, that there are lots of resources on both sides, and to get the FaceTime or get access, having donated or having been part of a company that has a PAC, those types of things, certainly help to get you into the rooms where you might get more FaceTime. But, I mean, also, I've got to say, I think that I hear stories oftentimes of people who seek out meeting their members, and it's a much more open door than they expected. That these are public servants who really want to hear from their constituents. Maybe they don't want to be, I mean, they don't always want to be screamed at, but they are people who essentially, they need to respond to the district in some way. So I don't want to paint, I think if you go to the highest kind of 30,000 foot view, I think what you're saying has a lot of merit, but I think that in terms of walking through the door, meeting your members, talking to them about your neighborhood, it might be a little bit different. And just as I would say one other thing, that in my Congress class, I always have members of the district office come in. And it's always interesting to see that side of Congress as well, where partisanship kind of drops out and the money kind of drops out. And if you need your passport and your flight's leaving tomorrow, they're going to try to help in most cases. You can give them any excuse you want. So I think it kind of, I always like to at least put Congress, to defend Congress a little bit, to say it probably depends on the context. And I've seen lots of hands go up, so yeah.
I just wanted to kind of respond to that. I mean, for some of the bigger names, you may see that. Me, I'm a third party. I'm a libertarian. You would be surprised how open both Republican and Democrats have been to just talk with me, and even invite me down to the State House, or if there's a chance to go to DC. There's open invitations for that. So you might actually be really surprised, because they want that buy-in from the public. You calling them and contacting them represents one point of contact, but you are the same thing as 20 or 30 more people, depending on how they kind of gauge it with their metrics. Your involvement is what keeps them going. So you'd be surprised on how open most members of state and U.S. Congress would be.
You've done this as an individual or as a representative of a group?
I've done this both as an individual and as member of the Libertarian Party.
With AI and all that, I'm just wondering, in your classes, if you're doing any sort of analysis, like, of their voting patterns, to see who would be most amenable to, like in my case, animal issues, animal rights issues or whatever, or if there's like AI can do a personality profile to say this person's more likely to, and irregardless of Democrat, Republican, whatever.
Sure.
I think we're going into an interesting era of hyper-analysis.
Yeah.
And I just think it would be interesting as a class project.
Definitely.
To do like a predictive how they might vote.
Yes. Yeah. So I mean, that's pretty interesting. So I would say, I wonder if using AI in combination with something like Congress.gov would be a way to say, I mean, who is voting for a certain issue, or who are the sponsors on issues related to these types of things, and right?
Right.
You kind of build
that's
that.
kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
As as an advocacy group.
Yeah.
Who are your likely targets to be amenable to introduce something?
Right.
And things like that. Or even who to donate or not donate to.
Right. Yeah, and so I mean, another thing there obviously is, I think, I don't want to empower the AI overlords too quickly, because a lot of times with work like that, the advocacy groups have done the work ahead of, they are the ones maybe building a legislative guide. Those might exist already to say, here are the legislative champions. Maybe if it's a federal interest group, it could be in different states, right? You could say, if you're living in Indiana, here's who you speak to. If you're living in Michigan, here are the people working on animal rights issues, things like that. So there are, I think, people looking at that. I think spending some time with Congress.gov, you could see what's happening at the national level there. I've not done that activity yet. I fumble with AI. I don't think it knows me well enough yet. I've used it in class, and it's not quite worked my way. But I've got some advice on getting better with that. So I've not yet done it. It would be interesting.
I also wanted to say,
Yeah.
I I created a website called WriteMyLaw.com,
Oh,
and it has some good resources on how to research something.
cool, Write My Law, okay, thank you for that, thanks.
Oh, there you are.
And last question?
There's one over here, Dr. Benny.
Okay, so I encountered this issue like last year, I think, or was it? Like during a general election, I'm like looking at like who the local legislators are and things like that. And it's like you can't find any information on who, like what they support, what are their ideals, like anything like that. Like I mean, I scoured the internet. I was like looking for Facebook pages and I'm like,
Yeah.
where are the opinions on this? Because it's like they'll be contacted by like groups that like do that sort of thing
Sure.
and like ask like, hey, what's your opinion? And then they don't respond.
That can be, so I was about to say, I know the American Democracy Project here has done similar things where candidates are asked in their own words to reply to, questions related to their background and also their beliefs on certain topics, and that's a good resource locally. But I think you're right, I mean, in terms of, sometimes when you move down the ballot, it gets harder and harder to find that information, but that is some of the work that Dr. Binion does to try to make that public, and I see other hands going up. But yeah, it's always interesting to me because students sometimes will ask, like, I'm looking for the nonpartisan, I'm looking for the guide, right, on this, but so much of what happens in a campaign is by nature partisan and strategic that if you're, most of the information you're seeing is coming from, the two candidates and they're trying to win. So it's hard to kind of cut through that to say, what's your real position on this, or even more so, how would you act as a legislator on this? Because you may say one thing public-facing, but it's a little bit different when you're in a bipartisan committee trying to work with people. So I would talk to Dr. Binion a little bit at the end of the event, because I know her resource, Election 411, is really has a lot of that info locally. I see this hand going up, so I'm gonna step away. Yeah.
Yes, and all of the congressional candidates did respond. Now, there would be various levels of detail in the responses, and we get really good responses from a lot of people. We have a partnership with the South Bend Tribune, and they'll print the responses, and it's any candidate on the ballot, so that does include Libertarian Party, Indiana Redemption Party, as well as Democratic and Republican candidates. And stay tuned for forums and debates as well. You can also look up voting records, and that's where knowing a group that you're interested in can be helpful too, because often they'll do rating cards. None of the groups I'm associated with do that, but a number of those groups, so if you care about a particular issue, we'll break down where the candidates stand on that issue, so that can be helpful as well. One other resource, since we're sharing a resource that I'd like to mention that IU South Bend has partners with is issuevoter.org. If you sign up there, you can tell them what issues you're interested in, and what that group will do is it will look at a brief summary of the bill, of what people are saying who support it, what people are saying who oppose it, and then you can click and read the entire bill. You can click and read media stories about and op-eds on each side, but it'll also give you just really quick snapshots of just little quotes of people who support it and who oppose it, and then you can, with one click, contact my legislator. And so that's for members of Congress, and then it will come right to your phone or your computer, however you set it up or where you check your email, and then you can decide, oh, I feel strongly about this, just seeing those different viewpoints, and so it alerts you, like this is about to be passed, it's being discussed in committee, or it's being discussed on the floor, and with one click you can actually make your voice heard on that. So that's another way to keep track, issuevoter.org.
Issuevoter.org?
Yes.
Will that also represent issues that I might have as far as local government?
That one is just the Congress.
Just Congress?
Yes.
Well, that we're just looking at federal then, okay? Has there ever been an attempt to organize issuevoter.org as far as the state of Indiana and local, St. Joe County?
So I can kind of address that from the Libertarian Party. So, much like, Congress.gov, the Indiana General Assembly, also has a no similar feature for Indiana, state government. I mean, that's one of the things that we're kind of looking into to see if, that's a software, package that we can, fund on building and being able to outsource. But, locally, that's a desert at this point.
So I think that's where Dr. Smith's recommendation of the Google alerts comes up, because you can put a Google alert for your name, you can for your institution. You can also do it for like St. Joseph County Council, South Bend Common Council. Whenever those words are used, it will alert you, and then you can look. Maybe it's relevant, maybe it's not. Okay, I do want to make sure we get to our next speaker so that we hear about the state level. Is this a very quick comment? Okay.
I simply want to know, wouldn't it be better, in your opinion, for America's laws to be written in such a way that American citizenry could understand them?
The question is about whether the law should be written in a way that the American citizenry could understand them. I think that's why there are bill summaries. I think that's why groups also will put summaries together. With AI now, we can probably get summaries. We want to check how accurate they are. But, there are, this issue voter actually does a really good job. It also gives a little summary of the bill, and it is in language that you can understand. So I think the problem is, however, there are a lot of things that go into changing a law, right? So they have to cover all eventualities and all the legalities and things like that.
May I just say one thing?
Yes,
Before moving on?
quickly.
No, just an applause for you.
Yes.
I just have one, I think we forget we live in a very complex society. What you see as a simple, understandable explanation may not make sense to somebody in Nevada, in a valley, rural valley. It's a process, and it is conversation. The technology is making it seem like it's so simple. It is not.
Okay, now we do promote conversation and what we call deliberative dialogue, where it's not about getting in a room with people where you can score points and see who wins the debate, but instead looking at multiple alternatives. What are the trade-offs? Discussing those. What can we all live with? What do we like from this approach, from that approach, etc. Our next speaker is Representative Maureen Bauer. She is the representative for this district here. If you live at IU South Bend on Titan Drive, she was elected in 2020 and actually in her second term passed 3 laws. This is actually quite remarkable because she is a Democrat, and as many of you would know, the Indiana General Assembly has a supermajority of Republicans in both chambers. So this means she knows how to work across party lines to get bills passed. She also was the National Conference on Environmental Legislators Activist of the Year in 2024, and she served as their state lead in 22 and 24. I did also and she's on the IU South Bend Advisory Board. I almost forgot the most important thing. I did also invite Jake Teshko, who's actually a graduate of our MPA program. He had a competing event with the chamber. We are delighted to have Representative Bauer back with us today to talk to us about state lawmaking. And I already heard several similarities and differences as I was listening to Dr. Smith.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm going to primarily focus on this website and empower you to find out where the bills are in terms of process moving through the legislature. And this is found at a website you should get to know really well, iga.in.gov. So very similar to the website that Dr. Smith showed us. This is for all things Senate and House at the Indiana level. if this slideshow doesn't make you nauseous, but here we go. My office receives many requests about where is this bill, not even if I support it or oppose it, but like, where is this bill, what's happened, is it gonna become law? And as I mentioned last week, we often don't know where it is until that moves out of the first half of session where a House bill moves from the House into the Senate, or vice versa. So instead of contacting us, and again, I only have one staff member who has 2 other legislators, you can go look that up yourself. If you ask me where a bill is at and what's happened to it, this is where I go to find out. So I have the most accurate information for you. So you can see every bill ever filed. It doesn't go back to, what was it, 1930 that you mentioned? But we started archiving maybe in the 90s at the earliest. So you can go back and see a log of bills back then. You can also see some old archive committee meetings and session meetings as well. And so this site also lets you see every vote taken, every committee meeting, and watch session live. So the main area I go is right here. And so this is today's calendar. There's nothing happening today. Right now we're in the interim, and so sometimes there are things that appear, like in the budget committee. See, on Tuesday there were 2 meetings. Code revisions committee met at 9:30 and probate code study committee at 10. You can just click this button here and it'll take you to the committee room. So now it's taking you to an archive page, which maybe I'm jumping ahead, and so maybe I'll go back and we'll get to that later. I don't want to overwhelm you because we're going to go through a lot. But again, I think this is going to be really helpful for you all. So we're going to use one of my very first bill passed as an example today, House Enrolled Act 1219, which passed in 2023, and show you how you can track your bills and your legislators and watch debate. So the easiest way to find a bill or a legislator is just right here with this search bar. So you can put in a bill number, like you know you're tracking 1094, which happens to be my bill, about licensure stenographers. Or you can search by keyword, like, I'm gonna try vaping. No, nothing. Maybe firearm. There's a lot on firearms. You can see anything by subject matter. And you can also search by legislator. So you can put in your name, it'll show you anything that was, well, it'll show you legislator and it shows resolutions. Doesn't show anything that was authored. Yeah, if you click on your name. But if you search a keyword, it'll show you everything by that subject matter. So if you don't know a bill number, just a topic, that's really great and helpful. People are often tracking similar subjects like animal rights or environmental issues. You can just use that search bar. So by clicking on my name, you can see all the bills that were introduced, and it says authored. You can also see things that were co-authored. Those are all House bills. When they move over to the Senate, it changes to sponsored. And then we have these are just like committee resolutions that are honoring people. We pass a lot of those every year. But I'm going to go back.
What does the inactive mean?
Yeah, that's something that's added new. So you'll notice the color, and I was going to get to this in a little bit, but anything that is gray did not move forward that year. Anything that's blue passed. So these are bills that I authored these 9 bills, and none of them got a hearing and none of them moved forward this year. But when you look at other bills, I was a co-author and these all became law. Same with this one that I co-authored that did not move forward. Anything blue became law or was passed. And now I'm going to show you a complete list of every bill that was authored. So you can go here to bills. For the 2025 session, you can see again, same thing. Anything blue became law, anything gray did not advance. In Indiana, there are rules limiting how many bills that we can file in one session. There were around 1,200 bills filed this past year, with only about 240 becoming law, so it's about 20%. Some states, like Colorado, they hear every single bill. I don't know the makeup of their legislature, if they have 150 members like us, but we're also a part-time legislature. We only meet January through March in a short session, which is an even numbered year, or January through April in a long session, which is an odd number year. And similar to what Dr. Smith said, bill numbers that have the 1 or 2, usually up to about 4, and same with House bills. Oh, they're on this side. It is weird looking over here. 1001 is always the state budget, so that's every other year. And then up until about 4 or 5 are priority bills for the majority party. So this is the priority bills for the Senate Republicans and priority bills for the House Republicans. I do want to state that doesn't apply, or at least it doesn't now, to the House Democratic Caucus or the minority party. There was some criticism over the first bill that was filed, was like an assisted suicide bill, and that was not a priority bill of the caucus. It was just that guy was on it. He probably files it every year and was the first to be there. All the other numbers are just as soon as you get that drafted and filed with the clerk, they stamp it in numerical order and get it filed for you. The bill drafting process is happening now, so in the interim. We cannot file anything until after Organization Day, also called Org Day, which is November 19th this year. Nope, 18th on a Tuesday. So that'll be the first day of the regular session. Coming up, we'll be meeting regularly come January. So we have, similarly, a group of nonpartisan lawyers who take our great ideas and turn it into law. And so I say to, it's called Legislative Services Agency, I want to draft a bill that tests firefighters' blood levels for contaminated PFAS, and they write it into the Indiana code. And so now, let's see if I can do this. Okay, I can also look by legislator, and then I've never really used by subject, because I mean, far too complicated. So let me go back here, and shoot. Session year. This is also how you can go back to see if you just really want to track one person, get to know them, what they author, what they co-sponsored. I'm going to go again back to that example of 1219, that first bill, which became law, which is blue. So we'll take a look at it here. So this is the main page for a bill. You can first see the digest, which is a summary, gives you a breakdown of the bill. This is the latest bill actions, but where you can see where everything is going, what happened with the bill. This is when you're going to say, like, did it pass the House? Did it move on to the Senate? What happened? That's where you figure it out. So every bill gets assigned to a committee. I've often gotten emails saying, I heard there was a first reading in the Committee of Veterans Affairs and Public Safety. No, that just means it was assigned to that committee. Every single bill is going to have that second line where it's assigned to a committee. Co-authors can be added at any time for the most part, so that would be the only action that you might see until it gets a hearing and you see the committee action. Let's see here. One of the best parts, which is a great, to your question, sir, about a summary, I always go to the fiscal note for a good summary of every bill. Not every bill has a fiscal note. If you file it really late, they're like, you should have done it earlier. We have no information for you. So if you're early, you can get a really nice detailed fiscal note by Legislative Services Agency, and it gives you an even better summary. It doesn't say necessarily how much things will cost. It'll just often say what entity will have the fiscal impact. But that's the area where I kind of get not only the financial impact of the bill, but also a really good summary and kind of breaks down everything really well. The other, I'm just going to click through all here. Bill details is the same thing, digest. Bill actions is the same thing we were looking at down below. And amendments are just the proposed changes, who offered them often, and what the outcomes were. So you can see that there were no amendments. It looks so different this size. Okay. Committee amendments. Yeah. Every bill is assigned to a committee, as I mentioned. So this went to Veteran Affairs and Public Safety. Just like what Dr. Smith said, sometimes bills are reassigned to another committee. Usually in the Indiana General Assembly, it's just going to, it has a fiscal impact, Ways and Means in the House, or Tax and Fiscal in the Senate. I have seen where some bills go from, environmental affairs and there's a new criminal penalty, so they send it to courts and criminal code, but that's very rare. I think they do a fairly good job assigning them to the appropriate committee to be considered. And this bill did also have to pass not only out of Veterans Affairs and Public Safety, but also Ways and Means, and, Appropriations in the Senate. So you can see the amendments just by clicking the plus. This is very difficult because you can't always tell what committee amendments pass. That's where you're going to find it in the bill actions over here. Let's see, any questions? We'll keep going. You guys still with me? Okay, there's a lot of information. Next, I'm going to, thank you. Oh, the committee portion you probably are aware of, but that's when you, as the public, get to testify. We don't have the option to testify virtually yet, or probably won't since we went through the pandemic, didn't have it. But you must testify in person. You can sign up online. So if you know you're coming down for a committee hearing and you want to make sure you're testifying, you can sign up usually at midnight on the online form, but you do have to come in person. And then we can just go to committees section here as well, unless you have any other questions about just the bill tracking itself.
Not the tracking, but you mentioned the, what the date, November 18th, what was that called again?
Organization Day.
Okay, so that's the beginning of when you accept ideas, essentially, to then be
That's when we can start filing them with the clerk. And then they probably won't appear on this website, usually till a week before the first business day of session, which comes January.
So once again, talking about the time frame and getting in early. So you would have to, if you had an idea, come to you before that organization, well before.
Yeah.
What would be the time frame then?
Right now, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or even after the last session has ended?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And where do we submit those one more time?
Well, if you have an idea for a bill, you want to just get in touch with your legislator and have a conversation with them, or one of the advocacy organizations that if you're working on like an animal rights issue, if you can get a part of the Humane Society, they have a lobbying arm. If there's any other organization I can think of, there's like, ASPCA. They don't have quite a local presence, but they do have one. What's that? Veterans organizations. Firefighters have a union that comes down and advocates very heavily for their issues. But yeah, that's where if you haven't talked to your legislator about an idea, start with the email, maybe ask to meet them for coffee, or if they're holding a town hall, show up and make sure you get in front of them.
I just have a quick follow-up. I'm so sorry, sir.
Yes, sir.
So you mentioned signing up online. Would that be through this website as far as testifying?
Yeah, I can probably try to show you that if we're going to move to committee section next. I'm going to go to, I can do this, I'll show you that in that section, if that's okay.
Quickly, were there any advocacy or organizational groups that are out there for this state that are advocating to have referendums for this state of Indiana?
Yes. I would say, is it League of Women Voters or, who just filed the 20,000 signatures with the governor's office?
Conservation voters.
League of Conservation Voters, yes, that's a great one that advocates not only on election issues, but also to try to get ballot referendum.
League of Conservation Voters?
Yes. Is that right? Did I say it right?
Yes, League of Conservation Voters. A question about the number, you mentioned there was a limit. Unlike in Congress, I believe, Dr. Smith, right, they can submit as many bills as they want. How many bills can you submit? Is it dependent on which party you are in? And is there a limit to number of co-sponsors you can have on a bill and number of bills you can co-sponsor?
Good questions. So it's not limited by party, it's limited by long session or short session because of the time frame. So in a long session, which we just concluded, which is an odd year, the House members are limited to 10 because there's 100 of us. The Senate usually doesn't have any restrictions because there's only 50. In a short session, it's much faster. The House only gets 5 and the Senate gets 10. So just depending on if it's a short session or long session.
I have a question. I'm pretty loud. Oh, I'm sorry. You look at me.
I'm sorry. A question more probably about the process of the bill. So the person who authors the bill, can they also be a member or a voting member on the committee that votes on it?
Yes, and I forgot to answer your question about sponsors. There's different rules in the House and the Senate, obviously. So in the House, we can only have author and 3 co-authors unless the speaker opens it up for everyone. I think he did that. No, he didn't. I can't think of an example this year. But here is a Senate bill, for example. Senate can have as many co-authors as they want. So you can often see multiple names if it's a really good bill. And then again, for the House, since it's a Senate bill, these are the House members here. We usually only have 4. And then, what was your question?
Can the sponsor of the bill also be a member of the committee that votes on it?
Ideally, they should be. My strategy is to get people on the committee to support my bill, to be on my bill, because if they support it, they'll vote for it and move it out of committee. So absolutely, that's a good strategy. You often want to submit a bill that you yourself are on the committee of. So I'm not on Veterans Affairs and Public Safety, and so I'm trying to make connections with the chairman and all the committee members. I may serve on other committees with those members, but you can certainly be an author of the committee, of a bill that you're in the committee of. You're voting for your bill. Yeah.
So I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time to ask this or not, but one thing I've noticed is, excuse me, that, well, one thing, there's a bunch of rider bills that are blank. So that is to add something later, right? But sometimes you see things like a bill that does not go forward, but a little piece of it ends up in another bill.
Yeah.
How does that work, and why are they so sneaky?
Yeah. I wasn't planning on getting into that because it is very complicated. But I'm happy to give a brief summary, see if it helps. Vehicle bills are what they're called in the Senate. We don't file those in the House, and I don't really understand. I think it's if they want an issue that didn't get out, they can slip it into something else. I don't really understand it. But they still say vehicle bill though, see, they still say. So I don't understand it. I don't know. I'm sorry. We could ask the internet later. But
Well, just for example, we defeated, or we had, did not go through about
Cigar bars, about, allowing cigar bars, and then all of a sudden, like toward the end, it showed up in the middle of another bill that had nothing to do. It was more about alcohol, but then allowing, restaurants to open cigar bars or rooms or what have you.
So on that page I gave you how a bill becomes a law, it's very, as Dr. Smith said, you learn this in 6th grade. It's completely like, this is how a bill becomes law. It's much more complicated, but that part of time that is very hard to track what is coming back to life. We say like nothing is dead until sine die. If language passes out of one chamber but not the other, during that final week which says conference committee, it can come back to life in any bill. And those are really quick conference committees. The reports are redone over and over again. Sometimes they're only 30 seconds. There's been a lot of criticism of that. There's no public testimony. Everyone just comes in, says, here's the new conference committee report, read it, sign it. And then we often have to just have a lot of backroom negotiations to try to pull things back out. It then moves from one conference committee report to another, and until we finally get rid of it. It's really, bad language to the public, which occurred this year with criminalization of homelessness. They were really adamant to bring that back, and it ended up dying. There was no public support for it. But yeah, that's kind of what I call the Wild Wild West. The last 2 weeks of session where you're like, oh, my bills are done, they passed, or my bills didn't pass. You should be able to get ready for time back home with family, but that's when you really have to gear up. Pass the word to people at home, tell them to email, tell them to, take some language out of a bill if they want to keep the remaining language from moving forward. That's also, it's a very interesting part of time too, because people get kicked off of conference committees if they don't sign it. So say, like with this homelessness language, we were like, yeah, we'll sign it, we'll concur with the changes that were made in the other chamber, send it to the governor if you take that out. And sometimes if you show all your cards, they will kick you off and put a member of their party in, so it'll be all one party, and then they'll sign it and pass it. Yeah.
So this is where process matters, and unfortunately it's very challenging to get people to care enough about process, whether it's gerrymandering or referendum or this kind of vehicle bill, to really raise a ruckus. But I think people do need to start focusing more on what we can do about the process itself, instead of being caught where we don't even know what's happening, and it happens so fast and without any testimony, and it does undermine democracy. Yeah.
I simply wanted to say that in response to that, it's because we trust our government. We don't even know about these processes because we vote you to take care of it. And we find out that you make it convoluted. And not even, I think a lot of the politicians understand it.
Yeah, it can be complicated. I will say those committees are streamed live, but unless you're sitting in front of your laptop and tracking the calendar, because also those committee meetings will pop up that day in those last 2 weeks. So that's also where, I'm contacting people saying, oh, we found the language, just come, like rumor is back here. And there's also those great advocates in the hallway. I know lobbyists get a bad name, but there's a lot of them that have built great relationships with members of the legislature, and will do also some of that legwork for us if we get kicked off, or they'll still meet with them, or vice versa. Committees, so interim committees, that's where we are now. So this is also very complicated, but these are like the standing committees that they have every year. They don't always meet. It's not quite as interesting as the committee page itself. Standing committees are the same committees every year. You can see members of each committee by clicking on it. Public health is an interesting one. So this is House Public Health. These are all the times they met. If they were meeting in the future, it would say upcoming meeting and a link to the time and where you can watch it live. This is where you can watch the archive video. If you remember what that date was on the previous screen, say it was March 21st, we wanted to watch that, and it'll pop up and start to play shortly. There it is. So that's all archived here. Go back and watch a meeting. This is the calendar of bills that they'll hear by dropping down scheduled legislation, or you can go to the PDF, which is the same thing, meeting agenda, what bills are gonna hear. Has all the committee members here. And also, when you continue to scroll all the way to the bottom, you will see all the bills assigned to the committee. They separate them from House and Senate. And again, we're looking at 2023. So anything blue actually passed, no? A lot of blue. Yeah, I guess so. No, that's not accurate. Not everything blue here passed. These are all the bills that were assigned. We did not legalize marijuana. And then again, here are all the committee members, the chairman, vice chair, and then they say majority member, and then members of the minority. So again, we're looking at a House committee here. This is also how you can email them. So I don't know what this does. Copies the members, but when you click on someone's information, you can either visit their caucus page. I'm giving Brad Bear a shout out. His brother lives in South Bend. He's the chairman of Public Health Committee. He is the Republican caucus page where you can learn to contact him. Has all this good information here. I'll just show you what the House Democrats caucus page looks like.
Representative Bauer, would you recommend contacting committee chairs and party leadership in addition to your own member? And if so, what is the best way to do that?
Yes. If you know a bill is getting a hearing in particular, or if you really don't want a bill to get a hearing, really do want to get a bill, if you get a hearing, you know it's been assigned to public health already, I recommend emailing everyone that you either advocate for or against an issue, in addition to your legislator. That's what I do when I want to get a bill or two. So the best way to email is through these caucus pages, where you have the contact information somewhere on here. I think probably the first step in addition to your legislator would be the chairman. So you can let them know, and if they get a lot of emails in favor or support, that might also sway them from one opinion or one way or the other, whether or not to hear a bill.
You mentioned standing committees. How do you get a committee that is a non-standing committee? I mean, are those like temporary, or you said there's standing committees?
And interim committees.
Interim.
Yep.
Okay, so can you?
Those happen when we're in the break, so when we adjourn. So they're also called summer study committees. So I think I jumped over that part a little bit. So at the end of session, members can submit a topic to be studied during the summer, which is actually right now. And some of them get approved, some of them don't. So some of them just meet every year, like Courts and Judiciary meets every year. We met one day. We got a summary from Department of Corrections in terms of capacity and how they were dealing with new laws and all that. And then they're done for the year. So it's like an update to see, how they're complying or adjusting to new laws. There was one on medical debt that was introduced by a legislator, and that is to study a topic before maybe a piece of legislation is introduced. There's one on public health, and they are going to then have what's called PDs, like a preliminary draft, introduced and voted on at the end of that interim study committee, and then one of those might then become a bill that could be introduced come regular session. So I showed you how you can watch the committee live, and the best place is, right here, showing you the calendar, and it'll have, like I showed you earlier, like Tuesday, we can watch them live. But you can also watch archive meetings. I'm getting lost. I need to show you the votes, that's the best part, right?
But this does get to your question of how can you find, at least at the state legislature, what people sponsor, what they authored,
Yeah.
how they voted. She'll show us next, and then you can also see the calendar, where it is,
Yeah.
who to contact, who the chairs are of the committee of the bills that you care about.
Yeah, right here, calendars and schedules, you'll go to like, I know I'm harping on the House, but House floor calendar is where you'll have often, like multiple pages of bills that are going to be heard. So this goes back to April. This was their last day of the bills that we heard. It tells you what time they're meeting. This is usually put up 24 hours. And then once that's voted on, it actually shows you the roll call vote. The controversial one. Again, this is probably party line vote, close to, we have 70 Republicans and 30 legislators. A lot of them are excused at this time because it's a concurrence and they're probably in a conference committee. So they're either concurring with the changes that were made here once the bill went back to the Senate and came over to the House, or you're dissenting, you don't like the changes that were made. So this is a good place to find voting logs. So again, if you want to check roll call votes, so we're going to go to House roll call again. So there's often multiple ones. So the last one is going to be the concurrence vote. So that's after the bill passed the House, went to the Senate, they did all their Senate stuff, and it came back. We often concur with those changes or dissent. If you dissent, that's when it goes to conference committee, and that's where all the zombie bills can come back to life and go in there, or you can just make an actual good change. They have the vote sheet here, which shows you a committee vote. This was a pretty popular bill, everyone voting yes. And then the roll call. So it'll look like this for every bill. Oh, nobody Dvorak voted no. Didn't like taxes.
Another South Bend
Yeah.
area
That's right.
legislator.
I think we're wrapping up, but if there's anything I missed, let me know. Oh, the other thing is to find your legislator if you don't know who your legislator is, and it's right up here. It's often the first step if you're like, I don't like this bill, I want to contact my legislator and let them know I want them to vote no. I'm just going to put in the address here. And I use this often, when people contact me, if I want to find out if they live in the district, or to direct them to someone else, or how we can best connect them to the right resources. Oh, I didn't put a number in, didn't I? Oh. That's not working. Maybe I'll take Ab off. Well. You want to throw out an address?
Spell out Avenue.
Oh, Mishawaka, that's Mishawaka.
Mish-I?
No, that's not.
Maybe 1700 doesn't exist.
Try to capitalize.
408 Western Avenue.
Thank you. Okay. There we go. It'll show you right on the map here. This is the Senate map, and it'll show you where you fall. And then click here to the House map. Oh, you're right on the edge of the House district, and it also shows you Congress. So this is in David Niskasi Senate District, Ryan Dvorak's House District. Your congressman is Rudy Yocum, and then you have your two senators. And it also gives you some contact information here as well. If if you click on a member, again, it'll take you to this page where you can either hit contact my office, you can fill out this generic form, which they will get, or visit the caucus page and sign up their newsletter, get updates from them, see where all their press releases are, and so on. I think that's the gist of it, right?
So we heard a lot of similar things, like the majority party putting the bills that it thinks are most important as those HR 1 type of bills, similarly to what Dr. Smith said about Congress. The mad rush at the end to get things through is similar with both. It being assigned to committees chaired by the majority party who will decide whether or not it ever gets a floor vote, with most bills dying in both cases. A difference in terms of the size of staff, it sounds like, as well as the limits on the number of bills. Are there any other differences between the sort of federal process and the state process that people should understand, or does it very much seem to mirror what we learn about when we learn about Congress in the civics class?
One thing I wanted to mention that I didn't is that while we're a part-time legislature, we're also what's called a citizen legislature, so we do have to live in the district. We also all usually have full-time jobs that we are leaving while we're in session, and that's a little different from Congress. They spend a lot more time in DC than we do in Indianapolis. We spend the majority of our time back home in the district. They also meet year-round. I mean, with random breaks, which I don't understand either. Maybe Professor can share with us. But, you know, we're pretty set, January through March, January through April. I also wanted to mention that obviously not every state legislature is that way. So that's why something like this is important, and maybe you don't know, maybe you didn't grow up here. Michigan is year-round, and they are working on their budget right now, I believe. Texas meets every other year, and Indiana used to meet every other year. So we meet every year in the middle of that cold of winter. And you know, we have to adjourn by a certain day. And all that's on here, if you just really want to explore this a little bit. This is the session archive video where also you can watch old either House or committee meeting schedules there from meetings. Yeah.
Yeah, just an interesting tidbit.
Okay, very quickly because we're at time.
Very, very quick.
So I'm not from here, and a few years ago when I kind of got into more of political action, I looked at the makeup of the legislature from the beginning to now. And until, you know, for most of history, it was very even if, you know, Republicans had the majority, but it was like by no more than 5. Like, it was very, very close. And then in 2012, it just went phew. You know, so it's just very interesting to me. I want to let people know that, you know, people think of Indiana as so red, but really, we're only that way. I mean, it only looks that way because of how it was gerrymandered, right? I just thought that was interesting.
The topic of gerrymandering is an important one given what's happening nationally and the pressure on the Indiana General Assembly to explicitly engage in party gerrymandering to get 100% of the seats for one party at the request of President Trump and Vice President Vance to create 100% of the congressional seats to be Republican based on how you draw the district lines. And so gerrymandering and the drawing of the lines does make a huge difference in terms of what you actually see. Part of it is the way residents distribute themselves, but a big part of it is also where you draw the lines. And so there are a number of different events and forums coming up to discuss that topic of gerrymandering. And I think, in fact, this weekend you'll be having a sort of town hall discussing this issue of gerrymandering.
Specifically, if you want to dive in a little deeper, just answering questions on redistricting at Riley High School Saturday, 11 to 12, if you're available. And then the first half will be on redistricting, the second half will be on anything of interest if you want us to work on other issues instead of redistricting.
When will that be?
This Saturday at Riley, 11 to noon.
Because Indiana requires always have balanced budget.
Yep.
When does the impact on the budget get reviewed on these bills?
In real time, yeah, we had to vote on and pass a balanced budget. So when the budget is always House Bill 1001. It always starts in the House. They often, do the same things or adjust school money by inflation, and then when it goes to the Senate, Senator Mishler is running appropriations over there. He takes all of the school numbers out and then puts them back in. So there's also a fiscal update that comes in when we're in session, and that happened, I mentioned this last time if anyone was here, that happened right before the budget was voted on, and it said we were going to be short tax revenue due to tariffs, and us being a very agricultural and independent state on that revenue, we were going to lose billions of dollars. So that's when they stripped a lot of stuff out, like cuts to Medicaid and local services and things like that. But yeah, it has to be voted on and balanced before we adjourn. Yeah.
Senator Mishler, of course, is also from this area, and so we do have representation across the state as well as some leadership from this area here in northern Indiana. They just have to take a much longer time to get down to the State House, so we appreciate that extra effort that our folks have to take compared to those Indianapolis based folks. Right. Well, let's give a round of applause for our second speaker, Representative Morgan-Bauer. And thanks again to both speakers.
Let's give a round of applause to you.
Well, thank you all for coming. I know that our speakers will be here for a few minutes longer if you have a question that wasn't addressed. We will be meeting again next time to talk about local policy making. We will actually hear from folks on county council, city council, county commissioner, learn a little bit about the difference between the commission and the council, how policy making happens, and how we can influence that, how we can talk with people at that level. And so we hope you'll come back to learn more about local policy making. If you earned a certificate for part 1 of our Civic Leadership Academy, see me because I do have your certificates here this evening and look forward to presenting those to you.